99%. It's a familiar battle cry of the Occupy Wall Street crowd, but when you break it down by class and color, the group is not exactly representative of the real 99% of Americans. Our next guest says embracing race will be key to this movement's success. CNN In Depth this morning with James Paterson, Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University. He joins us live this morning from Philadelphia. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
So when you look at the 99%, it's not really the 99% when you break it down by racial and even socioeconomic lines. Tell me why.
Well, there are a number of different reasons why this is a fairly complex issue. I think first and foremost, when you think about a protest of this nature and you think about the ways in which we want to include black folk and brown folk and people of color, there's some trepidation about the fact that they're going to have to encounter the police in these kinds of protests, right? So the relationship between the police institutions and communities of certain color and communities of certain class makes the participation in Occupy Wall Street skewed a little bit more towards the middle class and skewed a little bit more towards white folk who don't have that sort of history or the same kind of negative history with confrontation with police. So I think we should understand there is some reluctance, but the great thing is that Occupy Wall Street understands this and is trying to sort of work internally to become more representative of the actual 99%.
Well, let's talk about that representative nature of this. So Fordham University went down to the New York City protests, and
Yes.
that was in October, and they surveyed the crowd. This is what they found. Almost 70% of the people on Occupy Wall Street were white, 10% were Hispanic, 10% were black, 7% were Asian. When you compare that with New York City's makeup, you can see that the people who have the time or the means or the impetus to protest are not exactly representative of the 99% here. Many people have pointed out to me as well that if you're working 2 jobs just to get by, you don't have the luxury of going down there. If you're taking care of 3 little kids, you can't go down there. Maybe you're letting this progressive group speak for you.
That's the irony of the situation is that the folk who have a little bit more autonomy in their careers, a little bit more financial autonomy, may not represent the full range of the 99%, but they have more time and actually a little bit more leeway to go down there and protest. And yes, they do have to represent. What's interesting is that every issue that Occupy Wall Street addresses is an issue that is central to the communities that we're talking about wanting to be represented there. So if you want to talk about income disparities, obviously black and brown folk and poor folk experience the worst income disparities in this country. And so one of the things that we need to consider here is that Occupy Wall Street, those numbers are not that bad. They're not strong for New York because New York's numbers, as you mentioned here, I think blacks are around 27%, Latinos are around 26, 27%. So those numbers are not that great for New York. But if you look at those nationally, they're not that bad. And again, I would reiterate, there are lots of other movements, the Occupy Hood movement, the Occupy Harlem movement. There's the Occupy Hip Hop movement that Rosa Clemente and other folk are talking about getting started. When you pull all those movements together and just look at the energy and the attention that's being paid to Occupy Wall Street, and I think they're going to get it right. What's interesting is if you think about like the Tea Party or you think about the 1%, no one really talks too much about the racial makeup of those groups, right? But when we look now at Occupy Wall Street, there's an internal push to become more diverse and more representative.
And you look at some of the groups that have sort of been swept up in the Occupy Wall Street. So there's the Green Movement. There's Free Tibet. Sometimes you see a lot of anti-war folks. Some of those groups individually also have not really embraced race as one of their core. One of their core messages. So that also feeds into it.
It's another limitation, I would say, as well, that those groups, especially like the Green Movement, the issues that they're talking about are issues that affect black folk, brown folk, and a diverse population, sometimes in worse ways than the mainstream population. We have to, obviously, as a community and obviously as organizations, become much more progressive about these issues. There's an organization in Philadelphia called Professionals for Progress, or P2, that really was at the forefront of this move to try to get the banks to understand that they should not be charging these exorbitant debit card fees. And you see that get absorbed in Occupy Wall Street, but I wonder how much or to what extent it's acknowledged that there's actually black and brown folk who are organizing around some of these issues and really contributing to some of this movement. They're just not always at the forefront.
Yeah, and you look at the legacy of the civil rights movement, it changed America. So many are saying if this is going to be our modern civil rights movement or the genesis of it, it needs to be more inclusive. You think that will happen?
I think it is happening. I think what we have to understand, and we have to be patient here, that Occupy Wall Street wants to be more diverse. There's plenty of black and brown groups out there that want to be a part of this movement and that already are a part of this movement.
Right.
We just have to work together in a very organic way to bring those things together. And I think that's already happening. I think that's already happening.
All right, James Peterson, Director of Africana Studies at Lehigh University. Nice to talk to you this morning. Thank you so much for dropping by.
Thank you for having me.
Morning headlines
Thank
are
you.
next. It's 45.